I was mapping this morning, like the next 8 quarters, right? And I'm, of course, doing it in my spreadsheety written down kind of a way to just really put it in my hand, put it in my head, put it in my body in a way where like, I'm like, okay, here's what I can do in the next year. Here's what I can do in the next 2 years. That helps me feel like I'm present in my days more. I feel really empowered when I'm able to plan in advance like that.
Hi, I'm Shannon Lucas.
And I'm Tracy Lovejoy.
And we're the co-CEOs of Catalyst Constellations, which is dedicated to catalyzing innate change makers to accelerate positive change. This is our podcast,
Move Fast, Break Shit, Burn Out,
where we highlight catalysts that are creating amazing change in the world. In this season of the podcast, we are diving deep into the skills that make catalysts successful. And I am excited today to have time with Sara Fenske Bahat. Sara is a connector, most at home when bridging the creative arts, economics, and equitable design to shape our social and political landscape. As Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, YBCA CEO, Sara works collaboratively with the YBCA team to advance the organization as a dynamic home for artists, arts and culture, and social justice movement building. Prior to becoming the CEO, Sara served as YBCA's board chair. She's also previously served as the chair of the California College of the Arts MBA in Design Strategy, a groundbreaking multidisciplinary degree rooted in systems theory, foresight, and innovation. And I have to give a mad shout out because everyone that I've worked with who has an MBA from there is just an incredible employee and colleague. She's also the 2022 Presidential Leadership Scholar, exploring the meaning of culture and cohesion in a country increasingly divided across wealth, ideology, and acknowledgement of historic and present inequity. Thanks for being here today, Sara.
I'm so happy to be here.
Good to have you. All right, well, let's start off with how you relate to the concept of catalyst.
I mean, for me, I've started my career not really knowing what I wanted to be when I grew up. And so I found myself in a number of situations where I had to make the best of things. And I had to figure out what could be interesting about something challenging. It turned out that I was attracted to difficult situations. And so for me, being a catalyst is something in the neighborhood of leaving it better than you found it, but being able to identify what you need to do to put something on a better course. So I am less of a founder catalyst and more of a, how can we make this better catalyst, which I've done over and over again in lots of different situations, everything from what I'm doing now in arts and culture in a downtown that has suffered over the last couple of years, to work in my early 30s as a bank regulator in New York State, right? So I've traversed a lot of ground using that approach.
Awesome. There's something interesting in the work that you've done too that seems like it has you lean into the systems approach.
I do. I don't know that I say it that way, but I think for me, I grew up in a family that was really civic, blue collar, labor leader type family. And for me, community was always impressed as this really important thing. And so I do think that I'm attracted to systems at the level of community, and then wanting individual organizations that I work in to feel like they are serving community. I think it's why I've spent a lot of time in public service and education, and now why I'm in the nonprofit world.
Awesome. And I love the clarity about, I'm not a founder. I come in and I make it even better.
Yeah. I mean, I'm married to somebody who's more of a founder type. And I love the idea that catalysts can take lots of forms. I think we're necessary everywhere. I tried being a founder actually. And I can tell you that maybe it will be for me again in the future, but in the moment that I tried it and the way that I tried it, it wasn't for me. So there's a story there too.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's pivot. What are one or two of the essential skills that have made you as successful, crazy successful as you are, as a catalyst, and maybe some of the stories that have helped you? And maybe another way to think about it, like, are there times when you've failed because you didn't have those skills?
I think it's such an important question, especially I'm 46. Like there are things I know now that I definitely didn't know when I was 30 doing change at the New York State Banking Department, right? One thing that I'm a very spatial thinker. And so I have always been very at home drawing out a problem and thinking about the intervention points in a system, if you will, and really doing stakeholder mapping and analysis. I started my career with a degree in economics, right? Where I was thinking about things from that perspective. And to me, systems are really the thing that all of these things have in common. And really, like, I am very at home whiteboarding. I'm very at home. I draw spreadsheets before I actually build them. I like talking to people and drawing and making sure that I'm getting all the perspectives I need to start thinking about things. It's like a core skill set I've always returned to and developed over time. On the other side of the house, something I had to learn, especially as life got busier. I have two tweens, a teen and a tween, is time management. And I know that it sounds ridiculous, but I spend a good 2 hours every weekend trying to optimize my calendar. And my assistant has been on maternity leave for several months, and like I have not yet recovered. But really, truly, not just like time management, squeezing it all in, but knowing myself well enough to work with my rhythms, to make sure I go to the gym, to make sure that I rest, to make sure that I'm present for my family, and to really think about what parts of the day am I most almost, I don't know that it's technically neurologically, but what times of the day work best for me to do different kinds of tasks. And as I've gotten better at that, I just really see my performance improving dramatically. And so when I was 30, did I know that? I definitely did not. I was just going hard all the time. But, I think in many ways, as constraints can help you understand better how you need to pivot and perform at a higher level than without them. And so really mastering my own sense of when I do what best, that's helped me a ton. And it's changed over time, right?
Say more about that.
Well, I mean, when my kids were young, I felt like I was much more needed in a hands-on kind of a way. And I felt the most constraints in terms of where my brain went in whatever direction at a point in time. And now, as they've gotten older, I have a ton more flexibility, which gives me more time to not only care for myself, but it's expanded the hours in the day that I feel like I can go meet with people about their complaints or like big challenges. And it's allowed me to be more generous with my time.
It's so interesting because, like, when I coach or mentor people, especially younger women, honestly, but it's like the thinking, it's easy to get into thinking about the time management like right now. And I encourage them to think about it in like eras, like 5-year eras, because when I was a single mom before, I stayed in a job that was just fine. It didn't stimulate me a ton, but I had a ton of flexibility. I could be a room parent, I could be there. And so I like sort of the zooming out a little bit and thinking about how those eras have mapped to your life.
100%. And I mean, even I was mapping this morning, like the next 8 quarters, right? And I'm, of course, doing it in my spreadsheety written down kind of a way, to just really put it in my hand, put it in my head, put it in my body in a way where like, I'm like, okay, here's what I can do in the next year. Here's what I can do in the next 2 years. That helps me feel like I'm present in my days more. And when I overlay, like I know there's an election next year. I know that my kid is going to debate tournaments every weekend. I feel really empowered when I'm able to plan in advance like that and build in room for my life. It helps me do everything better. So yeah, and I think the trick, like the reason I end up spending time on it every weekend is like I'm constantly tinkering and iterating with the assumptions there. And like I just decided to do something kind of controversial with my team, which is I've yanked one-on-ones as regularly occurring meetings. I never thought I would do that, to be honest, but I really decided that our conversations are in a pretty trusting place as a leadership team. And I am very available. Like I tend to call my leadership team on my way home. We talk all the time. We're on Slack all the time. Now that we're in person, I don't know that we need the same one-on-one cadence. And I just yanked them all and said, let me know if you need me. I always have time for you. And it's liberated me a lot, to really, and it's done an interesting thing in the leadership team room, which is our conversations are much more interesting.
I remember we got to talk about this a couple of weeks ago, and I remember like that sense of the talking about the added benefit, the time management benefit we didn't talk about, which is amazing, and also just how that one decision is increasing the wheel for psychological safety on the team, but also the transparency across the team.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting, I think, over time to track this. YBCA is still in a place where we are very much a new leadership team, learning a lot about where the organization had been. I've only been in my role for a year, and almost everyone, there are two people who are on the leadership team of six who were on the previous leadership team. And so many of us are new to these roles, and we're certainly all new to one another, while also really modernizing an organization in lots of ways, like data informed decision making ways that are very new to lots of people on the team. And so it does feel like it's kind of a brave thing to do, if I'm being honest, because I'm not caring for everybody's personal experience of that. I do think it helps serve the organization to have done it, at least for now.
I think there's a reframe because you're creating this space. You are caring for people. You're just letting that happen more organically,
Yeah.
potentially.
Well,
Yeah.
and maybe just not babysitting it quite as much.
Nice. Yeah. I have a couple of questions about the time management, and then I want to circle back to the first one because the first one is so interesting. You talked about the energy flow, and then you talked about the different things that you're filling it in. You mentioned the gym and you mentioned the family. There's kind of two things that when you first start on this time management, personal prioritization, rejuvenation thing, that are skills that we aren't often taught is like, how did you check in with what your energy flow was and where in the days that you were going to be the most creative or whatever? And then how did you track like what different buckets you needed filled and how often you need them filled?
Oh boy. When I was an academic, my time was much less structured.
Mhm.
And it's similar to being a consultant somewhere, right? Like you have to figure out how you're using your time. That's not somebody else's job. And you don't have the benefit of a cadence that's been set for you. And so for me, that was a period where I really had to become disciplined or I wouldn't get anything done. Like I would write for days and nothing would happen. And or I would end up in endless meetings with faculty, students, administration, and also feel like nothing was happening. And so to feel productive, I had to master specifically when I needed heads down time, where like it was just my brain and a screen or a page or whatever, with a deadline. I had a like hilarious experiment in college where I tested whether my grades were better the closer I got to a deadline. Like I'm not a work in advance person. I am a work up to the deadline person. And I have a hypothesis developed 25 years ago that like I have to get much more succinct with a deadline and that really helps me. So I had to figure out when my head's down time would be, and then I had to figure out, I'm a bit of an introvert, not that you know when I talk this fast. But I also had to figure out when I could give other people my time and have it not feel like it was taking away
Mm,
from my heads down time.
mm,
And so I learned very naturally, I'm a very early morning person. Heads down in the morning, meet with other people in the afternoon, not that complicated.
mhm,
And then of course, like I had a back injury 10 years ago and knew that I had to build in activity. I didn't want to sit at a desk all the time. It's why I left banking, right? I did not want to only be in an office. And once I built in physical activity, whether talking on the phone, going to the gym, like whatever it had to be, I ended up finding that fresh air, if you will, whether physical or literal, like physically at the gym or like on a walk, it provided for me the shift in my day. So either after I have heads down or after I meet with people, I insert those breaks so that I can be more present for the next thing, whether that was meeting with people or my family. And once I optimized that well enough, I could commit more seriously to all the things, really. But I know everybody's different. I just decided to work with myself instead of against myself. And that was enough. But of course, like as times change, I modify that all the time, right? I just added a walk to the office on Wednesday mornings. I live pretty far from my office. That's like a 75-minute walk.
Wow,
Like,
nice.
yeah, but I talk on the phone on that walk. I get a lot of fresh air. I get ideas, and that like midweek break out of my routine is just like this nice gift to myself, where I'm actually not any less productive. I am giving my morning time to others by talking on the phone, but I'm giving myself, an arrival at the office that feels like I've already done something, but also given myself something.
Nice. Yeah, I love the idea of the different types of like brain body breaks and
Yeah.
resets throughout the day, and like how that sets you up mentally, energetic wise for whatever is coming next. Yeah. So going back, your first one about the drawing out a problem. I mean, that definitely sounds like a CCA design MBA tool, I would imagine. But tell us a little bit more about like how did you come to do that? Was that always natural for you, and maybe a time you wished you had had it, or a time that it worked really well?
Um, Going back to when I was a kid, I was always really good at art and really good at math. And I, coming from this blue collar place, I didn't have a lot of guidance on what to do for a living, if you will, but I was encouraged very strongly to stick on the math side of the equation. And so, when I look at the arc of my career, I think my early choices were clearly oriented in that direction from the perspective of economic safety.
Mm.
I paid my way through school, and like that was a sure bet than doing something a little bit more risky. Um, I've also, so I've always had a drawing piece. There's always been like a hand mind connection for me. I draw people. During the pandemic, I was drawing the Zoom screen on index cards of like whoever was talking as a way to pay attention and remember the conversation. Um, and at some point, I'm not sure when, I mean, every apartment I've ever had, I've literally used graph paper and cut up Post-it notes to move around furniture before I would actually move around furniture. Like it's a whole thing. And to me, it's just like working with myself. I'm also dyslexic. And so there's a piece of this that while in grad school, I spent a lot of time in spreadsheets. I find that mapping it out shortens the distance between asking myself a question and figuring out the answer. And so trying to do that accurately and including all the information, just using my hands is something that feels really good in terms of my processing before I sort of jump to the page, if you will.
And how do you bring it? Is it just for you, or do you bring other people into
I
your
bring other people too.
process?
I actually have weekly scheduled whiteboard time that anyone on my team can book. I try to encourage more people to just pull things apart this way. I was recently with a portion of our team that runs special events, and they run a few categories of special events, and they are considering their workflows and ways in which they might become not only more efficient but more user friendly, like more friendly to the clients that we work with. And I don't know that anyone had ever given them the luxury of just pulling it apart
Mhm.
visually and sort of working through a system without the necessary assumption that it needs to stay how it is. So I use it as a management tool all the time as a way to like pivot people's thinking about what is possible. And I think different types of organizations are more adept at that and more hospitable to that than others. It's been an interesting experience for me to enter a cultural institution that doesn't do that on the regular, and really fun to interject it in a way that I don't know, can feel like it increases the amount of ownership a team has over their work. Like I just sit there as facilitator. I actually am not I'm just pulling it apart, right? And
Mhm.
asking them the questions about how to make it better. Um,
I think there's something interesting too for me about the whiteboarding process historically for me. Before the whiteboarding process, we may be talking about a change and everyone is in the room nodding and they're all saying the same words. But the pictures in their heads or the reality behind that is actually not the same. And so, in my experience, and I'd love to hear from you, when you start to get it on the whiteboard, they're like, oh, that's not what I thought we were talking about.
Totally. I mean, I was with my team a couple weeks ago, whiteboarding something, and I don't even remember exactly what it was, but somebody on my team suggested I I think we were doing a tree of like all the component pieces of a portion of our work. And someone insisted that one portion needed to be broken into two. And I'm like, really though? Isn't that the same thing? And they're like, no, those are discrete activities. They are not the same thing. And that was just, I mean, it's a perfect example of what you're describing. Um, I like those visuals. I think they're low stakes, right? Like it's not people generally are not making decisions in whiteboarding sessions. I think it is a way to find common understanding, much more so than like reviewing a PowerPoint deck.
Right? Totally. No, it really is. Because there's something that's more static and it's certainly not interactable, right? So, yeah. Um, I love that. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. So next, and maybe this connects to those and maybe they don't, like what's your biggest challenge right now as a Catalyst leader?
I have a few, if I'm being honest. I mean, the biggest is that I am running an organization that is smack dab in like the most challenged downtown in America, right?
True story.
The vacancy rates in downtown San Francisco are the highest of any major American city. They don't show any signs of returning for reasons laying people off, and those being the primary employers in that district, right? So we have a city that is trying to figure out what they do about that. And I'm sitting on 135,000 square feet of like prime real estate that is designed to bring people downtown. It was easier when there already were people downtown. And so I like view it as a delicious challenge. I loved my time working on New York's post 9/11 recovery, and it feels very similar to that. Just to say, what is the role of institutions in a city that has like a major area to change in a way and like change the energy of significantly. That crosses for me with the challenges of the organization, which had gotten away, especially during the pandemic, of programming its spaces, right? Like we couldn't do that. And so I have this like internal, external cross section of challenges as a leader that's very human in a lot of ways. Like I have an internal team that is having to adjust significantly. And we have an audience shift of who we can assume is coming into our spaces and how do we get them there. So, I mean, I very much expect that that's the challenge that sits with me for at least the next year or two, as we try to continue to be responsive, but I think we have to push responsive to a pretty new place to be generative. So that's right now. It's a lot.
That is a lot. That is a lot. There's so much more that I want to ask you about that, but I think let's leave that there and we'll move on to the rapid fire, which hopefully is really fun. All right. So one thing that you do to get ready for a really big meeting.
I wear something that I love. And increasingly now for big talks, I have a coach this is a pro tip for people. I have a coach who's encouraged me to get away from writing remarks and memorizing them, and rather going on walks and talking to myself or to my phone and putting it in my body so that I never screw up. I'm always authentic. I can lose the perfection crap and feel like myself.
Yes, I got that. I got that advice before my TEDx talk, and it was so great. It's game changing. It really is.
Totally.
Like it's your story. How you can't forget your story.
That's right.
All right. What's your favorite way to spend a free day?
Doing nothing. I just got back from Napa where I did nothing for 3 days in a row. Best thing ever. I never get to do nothing. I like to go, I spend time outside, hang with my dog, read, hang out with my family, watch TV, sleep.
Yes. All the restorative things. What's your favorite famous catalyst, alive or dead, and why?
Okay, Julie Kaufman, this one is for you. Julie Kaufman is a woman who's from my hometown in Milwaukee. You should all look her up. She's a real estate developer / social entrepreneur. She brought bike share to Milwaukee. She renovated this incredible building dedicated to Black entrepreneurship called the Sherman Phoenix. And which PS is like this amazing story. Go look it up. It's a former bank building that was set on fire during race riots that she revitalized and made into this different thing. She's transferring the ownership back to the community. She has a really cool project going up right now in Evanston, Illinois. She's incredible. Really, really incredible, forward-thinking human being. And like, shout out to my hometown girl.
Love it. Love
Yeah.
it. All right. We'll put a link to her and her work in the show notes. All right. So call to action for our listeners then.
Just keep doing the thing. It's so easy to get tired and discouraged. I believe that we all have to bring our optimism and energy to the challenges that we have. Try to find a little joy in it. Do that dance party thing. Find your people, shoulder to shoulder, always. That's all I got for call to action. You can also donate to YBCA if you're so inclined.
Well, that's,
like, I'm more
yeah.
into the spiritual thing than that part of it.
Yeah, I hear you. It's leave it better than you found it.
Always.
Keep doing
Always.
that.
Always.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and passion with us, Sara.
It's so amazing to be with you again. Thank you so much.
To our listeners, thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to learn more about how to accelerate positive change, go to our website at catalystconstellations.com. Of course, be sure to check out the book, Move Fast, Break Shit, Burn Out, the personal operating manual for catalysts and change agents. And if you have other catalysts in your life, hit the share button and send a link their way. Thanks.